There you go. So I could spend a long time talking to Mina about all sorts of things, but we all have busy lives. And so what I'm going to try and do now is extract information from her for you about how you can be better at product. Either better at hiring product people, or better at building product yourself, or better at understanding what the douchebags who build product at your company are talking about. Whatever it is, I want to help you get there. And so here's where we're going to start. Mina put out a blog post the week before last that I really liked. So we live in a completionist, to-do list, task list culture if we live online, right? The number of productivity apps on your phone is extraordinary. And we all tend to define our day or our week or our success by, I made this list of things to do, and now I've checked off all the list of things to do, so I've done my job. And you know, pat myself on the back, that's awesome. And Mina's point in this blog post was that in the context of product, through the frame of reference of product, those are tactics. And lots of people, so whatever you put on your list are tactical things. They're very specifically, I need to tweet this. I need to create this campaign. I need to reach out to this person. I need to do this product spec. I need to talk to this engineer. These are things that you know you can do and you can check off your list. And that's awesome. I mean, they really are important. But there's also strategy. There's strategy and there's tactics. So I'm personally not a fan of using war metaphors for startups all the time. One, because it's some masculine bullshit. Two, because anybody who's ever been to war laughs at your startup. Truly. That being said, I'm about to quote a war thing. So, my apologies. But there's this great quote, I don't know who said it, somebody said, strategy is what happens before you get to the battlefield. Tactics is what happens on the battlefield. Anybody know who said that? Well, I'm not the only one. Great. Awesome. So the point of Mina's blog post was that as a product manager, as a product person, you need to be doing strategy and tactics. Tactics are easy to do because you can check them off your list and you feel good. But a very key part of your role and a key part of the success that you can bring to the organization you're working with is in strategy. So the first thing I want to talk to you about, Mina, is what is strategy in a product sense? And the second thing I want to talk about is how do you know, once you know what strategy is and you're kind of doing strategy, how do you know when you've done enough strategy? Like when do you climb off the treadmill and get back to your tactical work? But let's start with what is strategy in the product sense?
Yeah. So I think for me, strategy is really about the why. Like fundamentally, when you're never done with strategy, right? Like you keep coming back to it.
Yeah.
And I think an important thing is making sure that you take the time to do strategy, because it's like you said, right? It's like, and I'm very much a victim of this, and I think everyone else, like when you're an engineer, when you're a designer, like generally in roles, there's very specific things that you can point to and say, I did that. I wrote those 100 lines of code. I did that icon. I created this image. I built this wireframe. Like there's things you can say you did.
Yeah.
As a PM, it's very hard to say what you did. You're like, I facilitated that meeting? Like, what did you do? And so it's especially hard. So then it feels really good as a PM to be like, oh yeah, I responded to those 25 emails today. And the thing that for me really strategy is about is the ability to be able to say and explain why we're doing something. Because as a PM, like what you can do that no one else can do, I think, is that you can talk about the impact and the value of what your product is going to do in every single sense of the word, in terms of like how it's going to affect engineering, how it's going to affect product, how it's going to affect the company, how it's going to change like the real numbers that the company is trying to change. Yeah. And so to me, like the ability to say that like I'm done with strategy at this time is that I have what I need to be able to say, this is why we're doing the specific things that we're doing. And strategy, I think, like ultimately what it does is concretely it represents itself in different ways. It's like, in one way it can be like, hey, here's a set of 5 principles that I put together. And like 3 and 5 are really good numbers. Like for me, they work really well because it's
Yeah.
like, there's like 3 things that you can say, like, here are the 3 core principles of what it is that we're actually doing. And whatever those 3 things are, like they're just very like, they fundamentally form a framework for decision making. If you say like, okay, should I be doing this specific thing? Should we build this feature or that feature? Should we add this product to the roadmap? If you've done the strategy work, then you always have an answer to that question. So that's to me what strategy is about, is like, do you have what you need to be able to answer why you're going to do A over B?
Okay. How much of strategy is about competitive analysis? Like about competition in the marketplace? Is that all of it, some of it, or none of it?
It's some of it, but I think a smaller portion of it. Like,
Okay.
I think that like you want to have a sense of what's out there in the marketplace because you want to know how you're going to differentiate yourself. But you don't do things to be like, well, I'm not like this person. You say, here's the problem. Here is the burning need. Here is what people cannot do today. This is why they need to be able to do it. And here are the 10 things out there that say they're trying to solve it, but here's why they're not solving the burning need. And that's really, it's more about sort of establishing for yourself that there isn't somebody out there already actually doing exactly what you're trying to do and doing it well, as opposed to being like, oh, let me focus on the competition. The competition is secondary. The competition is something I think that you do at the beginning to establish that they're not really solving the problem.
Okay. I would argue that there's lots of good product people. I've worked with lots of good product people. I would argue that there's very few great product people. What pushes somebody from good to great as a product person? What gets you from being in the 90th percentile to the 99th percentile?
Great question. I'm still trying to answer it, like I think on a day-to-day basis, even when I hire people. But I think for me, there's a couple of things that always stand out. One is like, there's a certain, like, I think, and this is true of any profession, which isn't to say that you can't, there's some innate ability. And that innate ability, I think, for product people is like a natural curiosity. And if you have it, you get it. And if you don't, you might be able to develop it, but it's a lot of hard work. So like one question that I always really love to ask people when I'm hiring them is like, okay, tell me about your favorite product. But you cannot pick a hardware product or an app or a website. It has to be like a physical thing. And I'm always really intrigued by what people say. And like to this day, I still remember this top like 3 or 4 answers that people have picked. And those are the 3 or 4 best product people that I've ever worked with. Because like they just have this very natural curiosity about like, why does something work that way? What would make it better? Like what is each of these individual things that went into it? And from a very like deeply deep, it doesn't matter, like one person like picked this particular type of corkscrew. She didn't just say corkscrew, she said this particular type of corkscrew made by this brand and this model number of it, and here's why. And like she went into the details and like thought about it. To this day, she's one of the best product people that I've ever hired. So I think like it's developing that sense of curiosity, always asking why. And that's to me like, because a lot of people, a big part of being a good PM is being super organized and like really being able to take like 100 things and figure out like, okay, how do I do these things and what are prioritized and how do I put them in the right place? That's great. That's super important. But in order to do that well, the best people are the ones who are like, well, hold on, why am I doing any of these things? What is the purpose of it and how does it ultimately relate to the company? How does it relate to the product? How does it move us to the next level? And that is something that like people that really deeply focus on the why and can always articulate, this is the reason that we are doing this particular thing.
Yeah, I got to work on my product skills, clearly. So this is a two-parter, and it's when do you hire your first product manager? So to give you some context on the audience, like everybody here cares about software and startups and the internet and these things. The number of people in this room who've raised $10 million or more is very small. The number of people in this room who've raised $1 million or more is very small. So in many cases, in the beginning, the founder, the technical or non-technical founder, doesn't matter, but one of the founders is owning product. And then, God willing, you all have tremendous success, and at some point you need to bring on somebody to own product for you. When is that time? Is there some magical moment? You were first at ModCloth, you were first at Uber. Both have done extraordinarily well, partially due to your stewardship. So besides hiring you, when and how do you hire good product people? Your first product hire.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things to that. One is that, as a founder, as a CEO, it's hard to give up product, especially when it is it's such a core part of your company.
Yeah.
And I'll give Travis a lot of credit for this. I think one of the things he did extraordinarily well is figure out the right way to give, you have to be in a state of mind where you're willing to give this person autonomy to do the things they need to do, but at the same time know where the line is so that you can be involved. And so it's partly that you have to be ready to say I am ready to let go of some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Because I know that there's other stuff, other things that need to happen that need me more. So I think that's part of it. It's first you have to get to a place where you're ready. And to get to the place where you're ready, I think it's that you just have too much to do. You just can't do it all. And at a startup, always, there's 100 things that fall by the wayside, right?
Yeah.
It's totally normal and it's good. It's good to have things fall by the wayside because you probably don't need to be doing all of them. But when it gets to the point where more than once things that have fallen by the wayside are things that needed to be done, that's the point at which you have too much to do. You have too much on your plate. You've let something go that you shouldn't have let go.
Yeah.
And you need to ask yourself really thoughtfully, did I let that go because I had too much to do or because I just wasn't doing what I needed to do properly? I had the time, I could have done it, I just fucked it up.
Yeah. You've already given us one example of a brilliant product question, which is what is your favorite product, for hiring people? And I promise you I'm going to use that next time I hire a product person. I've seen lots of people struggle hiring product people because what do you say in a 1-hour interview or what do you say in 4 1-hour interviews that conveys your ability to understand product, your ability to build product, your ability to prioritize features appropriately, your ability to understand the customer needs, to be able to explain the why. Do you have any other tips on how to bring good product people on board?
Well, I think things that have worked for me in the past is products that was tricky hire, right? Because you have people often who are really good talkers, because part of being a great product manager is being a great communicator.
Yeah.
And on many different levels. You have to be able to communicate in a written way, you have to be able to communicate orally, you have to be able to do it over the phone, you have to be able to do it in person with a bunch of other people. And you have to be able to do it with people at all different levels of the organization, whether it's the CEO or some high school intern. You have to be able to work with them and everyone in between.
Yeah.
And so I think things for me that have worked well, at least when I've talked to product people and felt good about them, are a couple of things. One is you kind of look at the resume and you pick a random project on there. And you pick a project that's not too far off, that's not 10 years ago, it is also not 3 months ago, but it's maybe a year or two ago.
Yeah.
You say, why'd you do that thing? And people that are good always know why they did what they did. They may not go into the details. They may not remember all of the detailed statistics. So it changed things in this way, or this particular metric was really bad, and we knew we needed to change it. They can say okay, let me outline the problem for you. Here's the state of the company. Here was the state of the group, or whatever it was. We knew this was a problem, and here's why it was a problem. So we came up with 5 different solutions, and we said this would be the best solution for these particular reasons. And when somebody can explain it that way, I know that they've deeply understood it because they were the ones that were responsible for taking that and turning it into something. They may not have been the only people.
Yeah.
That's fine. They don't have to have been the person that led the whole thing, but they knew inside and out how that whole thing worked. And if it was a couple of years ago, you still remember it. It shouldn't be so far back that you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So I find that always works really well, is to kind of just can this person tell me, not not nitty-gritty details oh, we needed to change this particular thing, but they know enough to be able to speak about the overall big picture. So it's always a red flag to me when somebody's it was given to me by this person and we had to work on these things, or when they start getting right deep into the nitty-gritty details, because it meant that they weren't necessarily thinking about why am I doing this thing? And for me, it always comes back to why. So always thinking about questions that how does this person explain the why? And when that person's really good at explaining the why, I know they understood it.
So the one word, since we've started talking about product, that has come up over and over and over is why and why and why. I know that this answer is never universal, but what does a product manager's job look like? I know there's not a perfect answer. Like, I know that straight off the bat, but we know that there's somebody who's good at figuring out why. They're figuring out why this feature needs to exist, why this is going to affect the customer in a meaningful way, why this solves a burning need. So they've asked good questions. Then what do they do? There's no product management school. We've already talked about this. But if there was a product management school and you finished product management school and you got knighted as a product manager, and then they said you're going into your first job, you are an entry-level product manager, what are you supposed to do all day?
Yeah, so this is really interesting actually, because I was teaching a class of General Assembly, and General Assembly, like for people who don't know what it is basically like it's a school. And the school like teaches various courses, and one of these courses happens to be product management. And so I taught this product management course. It was like an evening part-time course when I was there. And it was funny because I was like going through this, like we had a lesson plan already, like they had developed this curriculum and stuff.
Totally.
And I was like, oh, I didn't realize people taught this stuff. Like I just did it, right? And here's like, so it broadly falls into several different categories, right? And there's not like, at different stages of a product, and different stages of a company, like the way in which you allocate your time is slightly different.
Yeah.
But like, let's think of like strategic versus tactical as maybe like ideally, this is what it would be. It would be something like 25 to 30% strategic, and that would be the upfront work, but like always a little bit of it going on.
Yeah.
And then the remaining amount of time is like tactical stuff. And so like strategic stuff is, okay, I need to understand the market in which I'm operating. I need to know like, okay, not just competitive analysis, what are people doing, but also thinking about like, where is this company going? Like, what are trends that are happening around me? What are the patterns that I can see in other places that might apply here? What are some of the things I'm gonna need to think about for the future? So there's some level of like research and planning on there. Strategic is also like thinking about the roadmap, right? Again, like it's not just thinking about why, but it's about articulating why, because it's really, really hard to write it down, to say this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, to put it together in a way that's compelling to people, where they can read it, and it's like you're not there to give them the benefit of the voiceover, but they still get it and they understand what it is that you're doing. So I think like that's, and then just sitting down and creating like, whether it's a deck, whether it's like, a like 2-paragraph like Word doc or whatever it happens to be, it's writing that and putting it together. So I think that's maybe like, 25% of your time. And then the remaining time is all like tactical stuff. And tactical stuff, I think like kind of, again, like breaks down into different things in terms of where you are in the product development stage and life cycle. If you're in that early ideation phase, there's a lot of it which is just like design analysis and thinking about like building wireframes and creating UX and working really closely with your designer and maybe doing some amount of user research and focus groups and things like that, or playing with a bunch of different ideas and prototyping. Then it's like, okay, well, we've kind of roughly established what it is we want to do. Now let's get into the details of like actually building this thing. Let's like come up with a feature list. Like let's write out how it's going to work. Let's come up with like a test plan. Let's develop the use cases around it and like get into like a lot more detail about like actually just building this thing and getting it out there. And that's kind of chugging along a bit. And then you have like, okay, well, what's the go-to-market strategy? What is the actual launch plan around this? And not just from a marketing space, but like, okay, are we going to release it to 5% of users? Are we going to release it to 20% of users? Is there a specific regional area that we want to get into? What goes into V2, V3, V4, and beyond? How do we establish like what all of the analytics are? Do we make sure that we built those into the system? Where are our dashboards to monitor and manage that kind of thing? Hey, how does this like tie back into all that work we did at the beginning, relating back to the strategic planning? And so I think like it's always like some combination of those things, right? And like that's for me one of my favorite things about product management is that it's never the same day to day, right? Like if you're in the later stages of a product where you're like getting closer to launch, you're like, okay, like for the first 2 years at Uber, I think I wrote every blog post and every email that related to product because I loved it. I had so much fun with it. In fact, I distinctly remember this, like it was my first like one of the first like month or so that I was there at Uber. And I'd like written this blog post for a product that we were doing. We put it out there, and like I walked in the office and do my work, and like Travis like stalks in, and he was just like, "Who wrote this blog post?" I'm like, month into my job. I'm like, oh my God, he's going to fire me. So I put my hand up and I'm like, yeah, I wrote to Travis. He's like, this is awesome. You need to write all these blog posts for the future. And I was like, oh, okay, that's really great. Like, because writing is such an important part of what we do as product managers, you know? Like, that's how you articulate stuff. That's how you explain the why. It's how you explain all of these things to, like, many different people. And so, like, always thinking, like, if there's any one task or one activity that I've, like, felt as a PM that I've spent the vast majority of my time doing, it's writing. And that writing isn't always, like, the same thing. It's not writing an analytical essay.
Yeah.
It's writing, like, putting together a PowerPoint presentation or keynote presentation, or putting together like an email that like outlines the go-to-market strategy, or a use case that here's how the whole flow goes and whatever else. And like that, honestly, I feel is like 80% of my job sometimes is just writing.
Is there red flags with product people? Have you met people who on paper should be good, maybe even practice seem like they're good, but who just fall apart when it matters, who don't have the respect of their team, or who fail to deliver? Is there any kind of like trend or early indicator, canary in the coal mine you've seen around bad product people?
I think the biggest one for me is people that have difficulty making quick decisions. And it's okay. It's okay to make decisions like sometimes slowly. The thing that you have to do when you're making a decision, again, comes back to how am I going to test whether this decision was right or wrong? And I made plenty of wrong decisions in my life. That's okay. We all make bad decisions, right? Like
Truth.
It's that you know you made a bad decision, and you know you understand what made it a bad decision. And so next time it goes into it. And so where I really see this happen is a lot of times, especially with junior product managers, is they suffer from analysis paralysis. They don't know how to make decisions. And so as I'm interviewing certainly like mid-level or even senior people, like that's a key thing for me is like, okay, given a choice between this and this, what would you do? And like you just present some hypothetical scenario to them and you say like, okay, you want to understand less what specific decision they make, but how they make that decision. Yeah. And so, like, I always worry when people are like, well, I'm going to have to interview, like, 100 people, and then I'm going to have to go do this, and I'm going to have to do that. I'm like, okay, that's not going to work, especially not at a startup, where you don't have time to do those kinds of things. You need to say, okay, here is, like, the best fit I can do given the time that I have. I might talk to 3 people. I'm going to run these 5 SQL queries. I'm going to go look back at the metrics and the analytics over the past, like, 3 months for this specific thing. And based on that, I'm going to make a decision. But I'm going to make the decision. And I know if it may be wrong, that's okay. But I know what went into making the decision. And if it's wrong, then I can go back and play at it. So like when talking to people and trying to sort of evaluate their ability, like that's always something I try to do is like, hey, here's the thing that might happen. What would you do? How would you approach it? And so then it's like, especially, and it may be okay at some companies, but certainly at a startup when it's so key to make decisions quickly, because if you don't do it, nobody's going to do it. It's just not going to get done. And so I want to make sure that whoever that person is, like they're capable of making those decisions quickly, and when it goes wrong, they can respond to it and adapt.
Yeah. So why is our theme? I imagine that anybody who is going to be successful in building product needs to have a measurement stick to compare themselves against to. So some kind of KPI. I think this is, I'm stating this like a statement, but this is a question. Have you always had, when you've been successful in building product, have you always had a clear needle that you're trying to move? Have you always had a KPI that you're trying to increase by X percentage? Or sometimes you're just throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks?
I think it's both of those things. It's mostly that you know what you're trying to change, but sometimes like you don't always know what percentage you're going to change things by. You just don't know because you're introducing something for the first time. So like I think for me a good example of that, right, is when our plan was always like, I remember we sitting in a room, we were thinking about this like whole UberX thing. We're like, oh, how might that work? What would we do? And always knowing that like we had a lot of ideas about how to expand our set of product lines. It wasn't just going to be about the black car, but how do we do that in a way where like a city could just be like, hey, I want to turn on like the ability to allow people to get I don't know, kittens tomorrow or whatever it happens to be, right? And so the product, like the success of the product was less about, hey, we need to like have this specific metric about this thing we need to change. It's that what we need to do is we know that in order for cities to expand, they need to be able to pull out their product lines. They need to be able to do it in a way where they can expand their operations, and engineering, product, and design are not getting in the way of that. They're enabling them to be able to do it. So there's no specific metric on there. It's not like, oh, like you could say every city in the world should be able to turn on product lines within 30 minutes or whatever. But that's fine. Like that's just a general, like, it's a productivity thing. And so many of the things that we did actually were like, how do we make this fast? How do we make this easy? How do we make this productive and efficient? And you don't always know what the answer is going to be. Like maybe it's like you do it so it takes like 45 minutes, but like 5 minutes we could be doing it in 5 minutes. So it's not always about, I need to move this particular metric by some percentage. It's that I need to know that this thing can happen. And here's the quantitative way in which I'm generally going to be able to measure that. And it may not be perfect. You may be off, and you may choose to change that later on, but you generally have some quantitative method, and you have some particular goal that's being met.
So we live in an era of live services. The mobile games that I love to death are all, games as a service. They exist in perpetuity. Launching them almost doesn't matter. It's what you do afterwards. And it's not just the games, it's all products, period. So we hit this intersection of kind of operations and product. And I think historically, those didn't necessarily have a ton of overlap. But at a place like Uber, I mean, that you could make some bold statement like the success of Uber has a lot to do with how well product and operations worked hand in hand.
Yeah. And
were able to scale side by side. Is that relatively easy to do? Is that super hard to do? Talk about product and operations and the intersection where they meet on the road.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, and it's a challenge in a couple of different ways. One is that, from a technology team, and technology and broadly encompassing as like product engineering design, is typically thinking longer term and strategic. So, okay, I've got to create like a system, a platform, an infrastructure that allows these 100 things to happen. So that even if I don't build all those 100 things today, I'll build 5 of them today. 6 months from now, I can build 6 to 20 or whatever it happens to be. Whereas, and the way in which you're judged is like based on that thing. It's like, did you build robust, scalable products that didn't break, that like consistently worked, that like solved the goals and met the needs? Versus an operations team is being judged on their P&L on a daily basis. Hey, did you increase revenue? Did you do this thing? And so there's a real friction there of like, why aren't you doing this one thing that would take you like a week to do for me, that would increase my revenue by X million dollars, and instead working on this thing that I can't see the benefits of at all? Yeah. And so there's definitely like that tension there between them. So, that's why I think like we certainly like in building products for our internal teams, for operations teams, with the pendulum swung a lot. It was like the first we started out being like, every city has to be exactly the same and it has to do exactly what we be, like we're not going to build anything special or unique for any different city, it's just going to work that way. So, of course that doesn't work after a certain point. So then we went all the way to the other end of the spectrum where it's just like, okay, every city can do whatever it is they want to do, and we'll like create like 100 different switches and levers and they can like move it all around. Yeah. And then, kind of like more rationally swings to something in the middle where it's like, here's this set of things that are centralized, and here is the set of things that cities should have the freedom to be able to manage on their own. But building products, like especially when you swung on all these different things and rebuilding products, yeah, to come up with that mindset definitely took a while. And it was hard because it was like, you found yourself saying no a lot, right? Because you just couldn't say, it's like, one city comes along and says, well, can you do this for me? And you're like, oh, I got a little bit of spare time. All right, I'll throw that in for you, and it'll take like 2 days. And something that's supposed to take like 2 hours never takes only 2 hours. It always takes like a week, right? It's always that way. Because you don't realize, oh, actually I've got to do this, and then I got to write these test cases, and I got to spin up new machines, and I've got to like run all this stuff through. It always takes more time. Yeah. And so you do this one thing for this city, and then the next week, city 2 comes along, and they say to you, well, I need this thing too. And it's, what, that city is going to help them, that thing that you built is going to help them get $1 million of additional revenue. Well, this thing that you built for me is going to help me get $10 million of additional revenue in a month. And it's like, well, I can't do it for you. And so you have to like, it's this very delicate balance of like, understanding how to say no in a way that doesn't fundamentally ruin your relationships with those cities, because you need them. You need them because like their growth is going to affect the company's growth, and that's the thing that they're doing. And so, kind of like coming back to the original question of like how do you work closely with product and operations, I think it's finding the balance of what are the things that we need to do that are really important from like a core like strategic infrastructure of like we've got to build products that are scalable that can be used, because if I'm going to build a product, I'd much rather build a product that can be used by 100 cities and still take me 2 months to do than spend a week building a product that can only be used by one city at this particular point in time. And so we did a couple of different things, and some worked better than others. One was just always to set aside some time to just like fix bugs, fix things that didn't work for people, because it's these small things that like when you have to do something as a person and it takes you like 45 minutes to do something that could take 5 minutes, but you do it like 10 times a day, that's frustrating. Yeah. And so if it's something that we can do quickly on our end to help you solve that problem, like the level of like just happiness that you create in people is huge, right? Yeah. And it makes you feel better as a person for having solved that. So that was one thing, is just having these kind of like 1 or 2 day like bug fix days. Like, okay, I'm just gonna delve in and solve these quick things, and like what looks like it takes a lot of time, if it takes more than 3 or 4 hours to get started on it, I can't do it, I'm gonna set it aside and not work on it. And then another thing was just to have like, basically like sometimes we would have like roving teams. Like people would love to travel, right? Because like that's one of the great things about Uber is we had this very decentralized structure where like there are teams all over the world. And you're like, oh, I'm going on vacation for like a week, and hey, I'm going to take 3 more extra days in the city, and like I'm not going to ask Uber to pay for my flights, but maybe they'll take care of my accommodations or something while I'm there. But I'm there, and I'm going to go work with that team and help them solve problems for 3 days, and then come back. And so like engineers would just sort of travel around the world like on their own, like and have vacations and stuff, and do this kind of thing, and it was fun. Yeah. And it's a good way to like kind of like bring that into it and create and foster those relationships with teams.
Okay. I'm going to wrap us up here because I have spent the time that I have claimed from these people's lives. The last question I want to ask you is very broad, it's very open-ended, but that is, as one of the most successful product people on earth of recent time, true, you snicker, but true, somebody who's seen a number of businesses grow extraordinarily fast. What broad words of wisdom do you have about business, about product, about startups, about how to do this right?
I think one thing that is really important, it's not just about like your career and about building products in general, is to just ask yourself like, what are the things that you're really good at? And why are you good at them? Like, I mean, I keep coming back to this why, and I know it seems a little like, it might be hard to sort of picture, but it's like, at least when I made the decisions that I made in my career, I felt like I had very clear motivations about going to certain places. Why did I joined Goldman because I really liked the people, because I liked the kinds of things that I was working on, and because I understood what I was going to learn from those places. And each new place and each new career that I think that I've personally gone to, like I've understood why I went there. I knew the things that I wanted to learn, and I really think that every opportunity that we have is an opportunity for learning. Like we very rarely go into things, like maybe, yes, we have our experiences, we have our background and this sort of stuff, but we go in and we're like willing to apply all of those things to learn. And really I think that's the biggest thing, is that, as you approach, whether it's like a new job or a new project or whatever it happens to be in life, I find like, if you approach it as a learning experience, like what do I seek to learn from this thing? And is it something that I really genuinely want to learn? I think that like you tend to work harder and apply yourself and do that kind of stuff. So like when you jump into stuff, like ask yourself why you're doing it. And that's just the most, like, there's so many products I think that I haven't built only because I've like asked myself, well, why am I trying to do this in the first place? Yeah. And because I've asked why, it was like, you know what, that didn't actually make sense. Didn't really make sense to build. And the times that I haven't done that, I built products that I think weren't very good. It didn't last very long because they just didn't fundamentally like solve a problem. Yeah. And so I think like that's maybe like the biggest thing I would say is just ask why. Whatever that happens to be, a product, a job, a career, an opportunity, a relationship, God knows what else, like ask why. What do I hope to learn from it? And if you go into it with that sense of this is what I want to gain, this is what I want to learn, then I think that you tend to approach those things and really like work towards earning that particular skill set.
Okay. For wine and koalas, we have two people who are going to come back, and they're going to pitch again. And then Mina's going to choose her winner out of those two. Before we get to that, I would like everybody here to express their appreciation to Mina, for getting on a flight in San Francisco this morning, coming through an international border, and if you know anything about that, you're clenching your asshole the whole time, praying that it's not you this time. Every time I'm like, it's me, but it's not, it's good. Mina's done good by us, and I would like us to thank Mina appropriately. So ladies and gentlemen, for Mina.